Chapter 14 Ork Killer, Part 2. The tidal spell sneaked up, and the enemy was close at hand, and was stunned by magic. So the short sword that Black handed out could not be defended, and he wore the title of Ork Killer, so that when the skeleton man faced the enemy orcs, it seemed that there was a slight movement correction. For a moment, the cold light rushed up with blood, and the sharp dagger pierced directly into the left eyeball of the bone-chewing chief. The pain made the fallen chief want to roar and struggle. But he couldn't avoid the 3-second stun of the magic shock. He was just a small chief, a small person, not a hero in those legends. Boom! Werther's leg smashed hard on the head of the guard beside the chief. Black released his short sword in the second, rolled on the spot, and lifted the skull tomahawk that the orc chief had dropped on the ground. He held it with one hand and raised it above his head, then slashed down hard. Puff! Blood splattered. The sharp battle axe slashed in along the neck and was blocked by the neck guard of the chief, but the spine was still cut off after the heavy slashing. Assassination complete. In less than 2 seconds, it looked easy and freehand, but it was actually extremely dangerous. If it wasn't for the little artifact like the Tide Charm in his hand, Blake would never have come here to die. Surrounded by 5 wounded orcs, the moment he appeared to assassinate, he would be chopped into meat sauce. But that's what equipment is all about. Help the user overcome the enemy and win. In the 3rd second of the dizziness, Blake grabbed the blood-stained battle axe, flicked his wrist, and the heavy weapon roared and flew out towards the guard furthest away from him. Deadly throw. Puff. Another ray of blood lit up. At such a close distance, the battle axe that rolled twice slashed into the chest of the severely injured orc, pushing him out with kinetic energy. When he fell to the ground, he lost his life. 2 heat currents poured into Blake's body, the big one was absorbed, and the small one was thrown into the soul-inducing lamp around his waist. The chief seems to be a rare monster. With the bonus of perfect assassination, the heat flowed in for a moment, the pirate rank of the character card jumped from level 14 to level 15, and there was an additional skill in the skill bar. But Blake didn't have time to look, and was pinned to the ground by the orcs who rushed towards him. The orc roared, his teeth were cracked, his distorted face was like an evil spirit, and his hands were stuck on Black's neck. In just a split second, the skeleton man heard a clack that was overwhelmed by his spine. These berserk orcs should not be underestimated. One mistake will usher in a burial place. Boom! While struggling, the pirate curled up his left leg and slammed it towards the orc who was lying on his body, pressing it on his crotch, causing the orc's eyes to bulge out for a moment. The Achilles heel of all males was raided, leaving his face with pain. The sharp murloc knife was taken out of the suitcase, grabbed by Black, and stabbed upwards, stabbed into the orc's chin from below, and inserted it into the brain diagonally upwards. The title of Ork Killer is really useful. In this kind of close combat, there is no need to think about it at all. As long as the stabbing knife is roughly in the right direction, with a slight movement correction, it will always pierce the fatal place of the orc. But the crisis is not over yet. 2 more chief guards bent over to pick up their weapons, dragged their bodies covered in blood, and rushed towards Black again. The new pirate rolled on the ground with 2 punches, dodging the piercing of the halberd in embarrassment. This is pirate fighting. Well, that's how pirates fight, it's not very particular about it. When he just got up, the orc guards were already roaring and pounced, and Black was left with only one of Werther's legs and no other weapons. Do not. There's still one. Enduring the pain on his neck, he took out a musket with a sawn-off barrel from his arms, raised his hand and pulled the trigger, banging twice, and 2 lead bullets flew out from the muzzle. At a distance of less than 1 meter, it slammed into the chest of the orc who rushed over. Like 2 heavy punches, the orc who jumped up was directly pressed back to the ground. In the thick and pungent smoke, Blake had no time to reload, grabbed the empty gun, and made another fatal throw. The slightly heavy musket swirled like a flying hammer, hitting the eye of the last orc, causing his slashing movement to go out of shape, and Blake also took the opportunity to pull him away. He moved his shoulders and looked at his waist and abdomen. There was a strain there, which was a bit tingling, and while the orc stood up straight, he glanced at the character card. Pirate class level 15 did not give talent, but gave an active skill. Sinister Strike, Elementary. Attacks with shadow power, causing extra damage. This. Black glanced at Werther's leg in his hand, silently inserted it back into his waist, and picked up 2 rough orc-style war knives from the side, and held them in his hands. In the burning camp, with black smoke billowing, a thin human assassin and a seriously wounded orc guard, 3 meters away, one tall and one short, were staring at each other. The assassin moved his shoulders, posing a Kultira's military swordsmanship, and the orc, with red eyes, glanced at the chief's severed neck. It spat a mouthful of bloody saliva towards the side, and regardless of the serious injury and weakness on its body, it lifted the halberd, roared, and rushed towards Black. The assassin also waved his 2 knives to meet him. The 2 knives slashed for a moment, and the shadow attack was launched. A black line was attached to the blade, making it look a little darker. It is true that most of the pilgrims walking on the road of shadows like to kill with one blow, but as a pirate, it is not always possible to launch an assassination. It is necessary to seriously practice fighting swordsmanship. It is really important to practice fighting swordsmanship at least before learning the disappearance skill that can instantly re-enter stealth after breaking forward. In this way, at least if the assassination fails, you don't have to worry about fighting head-on and being hacked to death easily. And finally, what to say? Isn't there a good old saying? In every assassin's heart, there is a warrior dream that has been hidden for many years. Control the speed. Don't rush too fast. At the same time as Black desperately assassinated the chief, Captain Darren Iron Mountain was also standing on top of a re-wheeled steam tank under the Dangarok Hill in the dwarf castle. He waved the 300 dwarves who were still able to fight, and formed an assault formation, making a full breakout feint. The dwarf mortar gunners and musketeers in the back also project firepower towards the beast crowd in front of them at the fastest speed. The bullets fly like raindrops, and the beastmen who rush over can't lift their heads. But the brave and violent orcs have already received the order of the chief Halkan Skullbreaker. They also pressed the entire army to kill all the dwarves who escaped. At the front of the formation, the dwarven warriors with the hammer shields had already meleeed with the berserkers of the Bone Chew clan, but the cunning dwarven commander had chosen a great terrain. The formation of the orcs rushing up could not be opened at all, and could only be suppressed by the condescending dwarves. Why haven't you seen the flare? Captain Darren stood on the steam tank, holding a large caliber musket in his hand, knocked over the fastest orc warrior with one shot, and threw the gun to the adjutant. He looked anxiously at the orc camp. Although he had no hope of Black's assassination, he still couldn't help but want to see a miracle happen. If there is no miracle, then relying on the more than 300 wounded dwarves under his command. They hold on for 3 more days at most, and they're done. That human must be dead. The captain's adjutant, who was also a dwarf, looked like a hunter, armed with a fine spear, and wore a green mountain ranger robe. Behind the tank was a roaring brown bear. That was the adjutant's pet. Although Halkan Skullbreaker is not a famous orc, I heard that he also hacked to death a knight head-on when he attacked Stormwind City. The adjutant handed the loaded rifle to the captain and said regretfully, "That human assassin is very courageous, but with his strength, it is almost impossible to win a sneak attack on such an elite orc. As I said before, it was to let him die. However, that human being is worthy of being a warrior under the command of Admiral Dai Lin, but it is as worthy of praise as the Admiral His Excellency's bravery in spreading the 7 kingdoms. He didn't lose his country." Whoosh! Before some chatty dwarf adjutants could finish speaking, they saw a red flare, rushing straight into the sky from a distance. Muradin's beard. He really did. Captain Darren Iron Mountain looked at the signal flare above his head in surprise. He exclaimed in a dwarf-like manner for a moment, but then his eyes lit up, he grabbed the horn beside him and blew with his cheeks puffed up. Whoa whoa. The low and powerful horn sounded throughout the battlefield, and the dwarves who were still fainting looked at each other, uttered a battle cry in unison, swung their weapons, and charged forward with their short legs. The Griffin Knights who were transporting the wounded away heard the sound of the horn, and they also turned around and flew towards the orc camp. Just a few minutes later, the kerosene and torches that fell from the sky quickly ignited the place. There are also spies arranged in advance. The sly captain was ready, and after the horn sounded, some dwarves who could speak the orc language roared, imitating the battle cry of the orcs, and shouted, "Skullsplitter is dead. We're done. Human reinforcements are coming from behind. It's a trap. They're killing us. The camp is on fire. We're dead. Our army is defeated. Run, run." The voices of the dwarves are notoriously loud throughout Azeroth, and they will shout indiscriminately throughout the melee, but also stop some simple-minded orcs from fighting. Even more terrifying. Like the clumsy battle cry of the dwarves, they looked back, and the direction of the camp was really blazing. If it wasn't for the fact that the Skullsplitter chief who sat there was actually dead, how could he have allowed the camp to catch fire? These dwarves are shouting for real. Humans are here for reinforcements. The breakout of the dwarves today is just a bait. They must have gotten the news in advance, just to flank them back and forth and kill all the orcs who have stepped into the dead. The flames of panic were lit. The dwarves' imposing charge was like a whip, slamming the bewildered orcs fiercely. They drank the blood of demons, and those manic powers burned their brains. Let their wisdom go away from them. This is the curse of power. Win. We win. Captain Darren laughed wildly. Under his command, the 300 dwarf remnants were like heavy hammers, slamming into the panicked orc army. At first it was just an escape of 1 or 2 people, but it quickly turned into a rout. Orcs obviously have a numerical advantage. Rush. Rush over. Crush the greenskin. Excited dwarves stand on steam tanks, wielding battle axes and yelling. The ecstasy at this moment made the dwarf a little carried away, and it also reminded him of the request that Blake had entrusted to him before the battle, Quartermaster Talma Thunderspear. The bearded dwarf captain thought for a while, then he was equally excited behind him, and the adjutant who was sniping the fleeing orcs with a rifle shouted, "Grave, you bring a few lads and bring back a group of orc prisoners." The hunter adjutant who was commanding the big brown bear pet and slapping the orcs around was stunned for a moment. He scratched his head, and with the simplicity and honesty unique to dwarves, he asked, "Darren, why are you working so hard? You're going to be killed anyway, we don't have time to take prisoners, these greenskins should be damned. It's a gift." The dwarf captain jumped out of the steam tank with his battle axe, carrying the violent weapon, and said to his adjutant, "A gift for our Mr. Ork Killer." He asked for the right to execute, as a way to comfort his comrades who died in Cosmodan waters. I heard that the Prince of Kultiras also died in that battle. Alas, these greenskins bring too much disaster. That was a prince, and he died so incomprehensibly like an ordinary person. The hunter Greif was also saddened by this. After the orcs took Cosmodan, the dwarves also lost many of their compatriots. The damn war. Okay, I'll go catch it. The adjutant picked up a gun taller than the others and shouted, "I want to catch 20, no. 30 for him." Such a journey of warriors deserves such a reward.